Hello and welcome to A Sound Constitution here on CHLY 101.7 FM, a show where we focus on health topics important to our community. This year's team is made up of 4 fourth-year VIU nursing students, and our goal is to demystify health issues and address common misconceptions by sharing evidence-informed information from a variety of reliable resources. All information provided on our show will be available in our show notes on our Facebook and Instagram pages. We want to remind our listeners that the information presented in the show is for educational purposes only and does not replace the advice of your primary healthcare professional. If you have any questions or concerns about what's being discussed, feel free to reach out to us on Facebook at A Sound Constitution, Instagram at CHLY A Sound Constitution, all one word, Twitter at ASC_VIU, or email us at asoundconstitution@gmail.com. Before we begin, we would like to start our show by acknowledging that we are on the unceded territory of the Nanaimo people with a broadcasting range that overlaps the Kowatsan and Sliammon territories. This acknowledgement is done with gratitude to the Nanaimo people and with the intention to increase awareness about truth and reconciliation processes and efforts on Vancouver Island. Additional information and resources surrounding Nanaimo history, reconciliation, protocol, and land acknowledgement can be found on our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube pages. Hello, thanks for tuning in. This is Taylor, and today's episode is going to be all about vaccines. This episode is going to be jam-packed with information, so I'm going to try my best to sum it all up and keep information as organized as possible to try and avoid any confusion because it is a lot. So my role in this episode is to discuss the recommended routine childhood vaccinations that are provided free to residents in BC. I'm going to be talking about what vaccines are recommended and when. I'll be giving an overview of the diseases they prevent and discussing the prevalence of these diseases within Canada before and after the introduction of vaccines. I also have some great audio clips I will be sharing throughout this episode, so stay tuned in for those. Later on, my wonderful co-host will be joining me to discuss topics such as boosters and optional immunizations, facts versus myths, and vaccine hesitancy and the history of the anti-vaccination movement. So I'm really excited about this episode, and I hope our listeners are too. So before I start talking about vaccine schedules, I'm going to begin by giving a brief overview of all the diseases that childhood vaccinations protect against. The first one I will be talking about is varicella, more commonly known as chickenpox. This infection is caused by the varicella zoster virus, and it can be spread through the air, such as when an infected person sneezes or coughs, or if a person comes into contact with contaminated surfaces or fluid from the chickenpox blisters. Children with chickenpox can have on average 350 red and itchy blisters, but this infection, although rare, can also cause more severe complications. These include pneumonia, which is an infection of the lungs, and encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain. Encephalitis can lead to seizures, deafness, or brain damage. The virus can also become active later on in life for some people and produce a painful rash called shingles. Next, we have diphtheria. So diphtheria is a serious bacterial infection of the nose and throat and can be spread through air or by direct skin-to-skin contact. It can result in severe breathing problems, heart failure, and paralysis. According to HealthLink BC, about 1 in 10 people who become infected with diphtheria may die. Fortunately, since the introduction of the vaccine in the mid-1950s, diphtheria has become increasingly rare across Canada. According to the BC Centre for Disease Control, there has only been 1 confirmed case in BC since 1998. Moving on, we have tetanus, also called lockjaw. This is caused by the bacteria Clostridium tetani, which is found mostly in soil. When this bacteria enters the body, usually through a cut or scrape, it produces a toxin that can cause painful muscle tightening all over the body. This can be especially serious if the muscles required for breathing are affected. Next, we have pertussis. Pertussis, more commonly known as whooping cough, is an infection of the airways caused by pertussis bacteria that can be spread in the air when an infected person coughs or sneezes or through close face-to-face contact. Immunized BC describes the early symptoms of pertussis as being similar to that of a common cold, such as a runny nose, mild fever, and mild cough. However, worsening coughing episodes can develop over a period of 2 weeks and become severe and last several months. Complications of pertussis include pneumonia, seizures, brain damage, or death, and these are more often seen in infants. In infants, pertussis can also cause pauses in breathing, also known as apnea. HealthLink BC estimates that 1 in 170 infants who get pertussis can die. Hepatitis B is a virus that attacks the liver and can cause permanent liver damage called cirrhosis. It is also one of the main causes of liver cancer. Hepatitis means inflammation of the liver, but there are several types of hepatitis viruses. Hepatitis B is spread through contact with an infected person's blood or body fluid. Newborns may become infected with hepatitis B during delivery if their mother is infected. If this is the case, newborns can be given 2 immunizations shortly after birth so that they don't contract the infection. The first is a hepatitis B immune globulin, which provides antibodies for protection right away. The second is the hepatitis B vaccine, which helps the baby make their own antibodies. After these, the baby will continue the regular recommended vaccine schedule at 2, 4, and 6 months. Another hepatitis virus, hepatitis A, also affects the liver and is spread through contact with an infected person's stool, such as through ingestion of contaminated food or water. This can occur during food preparation or by eating raw or undercooked shellfish that have been contaminated with sewage. Some symptoms of hepatitis A include fatigue, fever, vomiting, loss of appetite, abdominal pain, dark urine, pale stools, and jaundice, which is yellowing of the skin and eyes. However, symptoms may not be present in some people, especially young children. According to HealthLink BC, it is estimated that 1 in 200 people infected with hepatitis A will die. This risk is higher in people 50 years of age and older. Next, we have polio. Polio was caused by the polio virus, and unfortunately it has been eliminated in Canada as well as most parts of the world. However, outbreaks do still occur in some countries, so there is still a risk of polio entering Canada through travel and being spread if people are not immunized. Polio is spread by contact with an infected person's stool, which can occur from ingesting contaminated food or water. Most polio infections show no symptoms. However, paralysis can occur in 1 in 200 people infected, according to HealthLink BC. Next is Haemophilus influenza type B, also called Hib, which most commonly infects children under the age of 5 and is spread through coughing, sneezing, or having close face-to-face contact. Babies and children can also become infected through sharing things such as soothers, bottles, and toys. It can cause serious infections, including meningitis, which is an infection of the lining that covers the brain, and septicemia, an infection of the blood. According to Immunize BC, Hib was the most common cause of bacterial meningitis among Canadian children ages 5 and under in the early 1990s. Next, we'll look at seasonal influenza. Influenza is an infection of the respiratory system caused by the influenza virus, and it is spread quite easily through coughing, sneezing, or face-to-face contact. Adults can spread this virus from about 1 day before to 5 days after symptoms start. Symptoms can be mild to severe and include fever, headache, runny nose, sore throat, tiredness, muscle pain, and cough. Children may also have nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. Pneumococcal infection is caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae bacteria, which can be spread through coughing, sneezing, and through saliva, such as when sharing food or drinks. Babies and children can become infected if they share soothers, bottles, or toys, or anything really that they can put in their mouths that have also been in the mouth of an infected person. The bacteria responsible for pneumococcal infection can also cause infections such as meningitis, an infection of the lining that covers the brain, which I mentioned earlier, pneumonia, an infection of the lungs, and septicemia, an infection of the blood. Meningococcal C infection, also called Men-C infection, is caused by bacteria that is spread from one person to another by coughing, sneezing, and through saliva. Men-C bacteria is the most common types of bacteria responsible for meningococcal infection. Other bacteria that can cause this disease are meningococcal type A, B, Y, and W135. However, the type C vaccine is the only one offered in routine childhood immunizations. The others are either offered later on in life or not publicly funded. Meningococcal infection can cause other possible life-threatening infections, including meningitis, which is swelling of the brain, and septicemia, which is a blood infection. Permanent complications of infection include brain damage, deafness, and loss of limbs. According to the CDC, for every 100 people who get sick, up to 15 will die even if they receive treatment. Up next is rotavirus. Rotavirus is the virus that causes gastroenteritis, also sometimes referred to as the stomach flu, and it is most often spread through the fecal-oral route. This can occur if an infected person uses the washroom without properly washing their hands and then continues to contaminate food or items that are put in another person's mouth. It can also be spread from an infant to an adult through diaper changes. This is one reason why it is so important to practice proper hand hygiene in these cases. According to HealthLink BC, rotavirus is the most common cause of diarrhea and hospitalization for diarrhea in children under 5 years old. Symptoms include fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and stomach pain. Young children are more susceptible to dehydration, especially if vomiting and diarrhea are severe. Lastly, I'm going to give some information on measles, mumps, and rubella. Measles, mumps, and rubella are all caused by viruses that are spread through saliva, such as when an infected person coughs or sneezes or when sharing food. Measles virus can also live in small droplets in the air for several hours. Measles causes cold-like symptoms, rash, and inflamed eyes that can be sensitive to light. However, it can also cause complications such as ear infections, pneumonia, and more rarely encephalitis, which is swelling of the brain occurring in 1 in 1,000 people infected with measles. Mumps is caused by the mumps virus, which causes fever, headache, and swelling of the salivary glands and cheeks. It may also cause temporary deafness, and in very rare cases, permanent deafness can occur. HealthLink BC estimates that this happens in less than 1 in 20,000 people. Meningitis, which is an infection of the lining of the brain, as I mentioned before, is a serious complication of mumps and occurs in approximately 1 in 20 people. Rubella infection is usually mild and symptoms include fever and rash that usually last 2 to 3 days. However, rubella can have major effects on an unborn baby if their mother is infected during pregnancy. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, this can cause miscarriage or birth defects such as deafness, blindness, intellectual disability, heart defects, and liver or spleen damage. The CDC recommends that any person planning on becoming pregnant make sure that they are immune to rubella or have their MMR vaccine updated, and then wait 1 month before getting pregnant. Alright, I know that was a lot of information to take in all at once. Before we get into vaccine schedules, we're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to play a short audio clip from Immunize BC that briefly introduces the different ways vaccines are created and how they work in the body.
Did you know that malaria is one of the world's oldest and most deadliest of diseases? According to the World Health Organization's 2021 malaria report, in 2020 there was an estimated 241 million cases of malaria illness of varying severity and 627,000 malaria deaths worldwide. Over 95% of those cases come from sub-Saharan Africa. Over 80% of those deaths in that area were to children under 5. But change is coming. World Health has sponsored a pilot malaria vaccination program that has already seen 1 million vulnerable children receive the vaccine, leading to a significant reduction in severe malaria in those areas.
Vaccines protect your child. They prepare your child's body to defend itself against certain diseases. Vaccines are made in different ways, with a live but weak form of the germ, with an inactive germ, with only part of a germ, using a man-made copy of the germ, or by taking away the part of the germ that makes you sick. But they all work the same way. They help your child's body start to make antibodies. These antibodies protect against diseases by looking out for germs that can make your child sick. If the antibodies find a germ, they defend your child by attacking the germ right away. Vaccines are a safe way to build immunity. The only other way to create antibodies is to actually get sick, but that can be risky because there's no way to tell how sick your child will get. So if the real germs ever show up, your child's body will recognize them and be able to fight them off. That's how vaccines keep our children healthy.
Once again, that clip is provided by Immunize BC and can be found on their website along with numerous other helpful videos. Their website will be posted in our show notes if you want any more information. Now I'm going to give a run through of the recommended routine immunization schedule in BC for infants and children up to ages 4 or 5. The information I'm providing in this segment comes from Immunize BC and HealthLink BC. Immunize BC provides a schedule chart on their website not only for infants and young children, but also for school-age children and adolescents and adults. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. They also have tools to help you keep track of you or your children's vaccines to help ensure you keep up to date. So let's start off with one of the first vaccines given. This is the DTaP-HB-IPV-HIB vaccine. I know it's a mouthful, but that's because this one vaccine protects against 6 different diseases. These are diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, hepatitis B, polio, and Haemophilus influenza type B, which I'm going to refer to as HIB. This vaccine is given in 3 doses at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. As you may recall earlier in this episode, I spoke about some infants requiring a hepatitis B vaccine shortly after they're born if their mother has hepatitis B or if they're at risk of a hepatitis B infection. Well, this vaccine contains the required boosters for hepatitis B that those babies would get following that first injection. So yes, 2, 4, and 6 months of age for this vaccine. At 18 months, this vaccine will need to be boosted, but this time it will not contain the hepatitis B portion as children completed the series as part of the previous vaccine. This is also the same for the booster recommended at around ages 4 to 6 or upon entry to kindergarten. However, as well as not containing the hepatitis B portion, it also does not contain the HIB vaccine either. So before kindergarten, the booster recommended is only for tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, and polio. These boosters strengthen the immune system to provide better protection against these diseases. I know that may seem a bit confusing, but to summarize it a bit, the full vaccine that protects against all 6 diseases is given at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. A booster of this vaccine minus the hepatitis B portion is given at 18 months of age, and an additional booster of this vaccine minus the hepatitis B and HIB portion is given around ages 4 to 6 or upon entry to kindergarten. Now let's look at other vaccines that babies get at 2 months of age. Babies get 3 more vaccinations, the pneumococcal, meningococcal C, and rotavirus vaccines. The pneumococcal vaccine is given at 2, 4, and 12 months, and it protects against 13 types of pneumococcal bacteria. Children with certain medical conditions such as sickle cell disease, spleen dysfunction, chronic liver, kidney, heart, or lung disease, cystic fibrosis, or a weakened immune system due to disease or treatment require an additional dose given at 6 months of age. The meningococcal C vaccine is given at 2 months and a booster is given at 12 months. The rotavirus vaccination is given in a series of either 2 or 3 doses depending on the type of vaccination being given. There are 2 types of this vaccine. The first type is Rotarix, and it is given by mouth at 2 and 4 months of age. The second type is Rotatec, which is also given by mouth, but it is given in a series of 3 at 2, 4, and 6 months of age. Both of these vaccines contain a weakened form of the rotavirus that does not cause the disease. Moving on, we have the hepatitis A vaccine. This vaccination was added to the routine vaccination schedule for Indigenous children in January of 2012. According to the BC Centre for Disease Control, this was done following several outbreaks of hepatitis A in Indigenous communities. This vaccine is given at 6 and 18 months. The seasonal influenza vaccine can be given to babies 6 months or older, and it's recommended that this vaccine is given yearly. If a child under the age of 9 has not received this influenza vaccine before, then 2 doses are required 4 weeks apart to ensure adequate protection. In BC, this vaccine typically becomes available in October. Next, we have the MMR vaccine. This vaccine protects against measles, mumps, and rubella. The first vaccine is given at 12 months of age, and the second is typically given prior to kindergarten entry around 4 or 5 years of age. Along with the second vaccine, children who require protection against chickenpox can also receive this combined with the MMR vaccine called the MMRV vaccine, which I will be discussing next. The varicella or chickenpox vaccine is recommended at 12 months of age, and the booster is given along with the second dose of MMR vaccine as discussed. It is recommended that people who had chickenpox prior to their first birthday still get the vaccine, as there's a chance long-lasting immunity has not developed and they could get chickenpox again. If someone has had the chickenpox at 1 year of age or older, they do not need to get the vaccine as long as the disease was confirmed by a lab test. Alright, so that's the immunization schedule in a nutshell for children pretty much from birth until kindergarten entry. We are going to take a quick break and then my co-host will be joining me to discuss some interesting topics about vaccines. Later on, I will be back to talk about the prevalence of these diseases and give some figures that show how effective vaccines have been in reducing the infection rates in Canada.
Sometimes there is a lot of misinformation about vaccines on social media. Immunize BC provides you with a list of trustworthy websites for online reading that are credible, trustworthy, and science-based information all about vaccines.
Did you know, according to Immunize BC, getting more than one vaccine at the same time is safe and ensures you or your child to be protected against serious diseases earlier rather than later. Research shows that routine childhood vaccines are just as safe and effective when they are given at the same time as they are when they are given at separate appointments.
Did you know that the World Health Organization estimates that every year vaccines prevent more than 2 million deaths worldwide? According to Immunize BC, in the past 50 years, vaccines have saved more lives in Canada than any other medical intervention. Okay, we are back, and now I'm going to be passing it over to Cameron, who will be providing information on the vaccinations offered for school-age children and adults, and also briefly discussing immunity and the importance of vaccine boosters.
Thanks, Taylor. I'm going to talk a bit about school-age vaccines, recommended vaccines for adults, and vaccine immunity. So, to continue on about the recommended vaccination schedule for children, when children reach the school-age years, they have the chance to be vaccinated at school in grades 6 and 9. In grade 6, children are offered vaccinations for hepatitis B, human papillomavirus, and varicella, otherwise known as chickenpox. However, if the child had chickenpox or shingles confirmed by a lab after 1 year of age, the varicella vaccine is not needed. These vaccines are important because they provide protection against hepatitis B and human papillomavirus. Hepatitis B virus is a virus that causes a serious infection of the liver. Hepatitis B can either be acute or chronic and is spread through sexual contact, needle sharing, or through mother to child during childbirth. Severe or chronic hepatitis B can lead to risk of liver failure, liver cancer, or cirrhosis. Receiving hepatitis B in grade 6 provides protection from contracting hepatitis B. The second common vaccine for children in grade 6 is the human papillomavirus, or HPV vaccine. According to the Government of Canada, HPV is one of the most common sexually transmitted infections in Canada and across the world. There are over 100 types of HPV and range from anal or genital warts to cervical, penile, and anal cancers. The Government of Canada estimates that more than 70% of sexually active Canadians will have some form of sexually transmitted HPV infection. HPV infections may have no symptoms and can go away on their own if not severe. However, persistent HPV is a major cause of cervical cancer. To decrease the chances of contracting HPV, it is recommended to participate in safe sex practices and be vaccinated. There are currently 3 HPV vaccines in Canada: Gardasil, Gardasil 9, and Cervarix. Each vaccine protects against different strains of HPV. We recommend discussing with your healthcare provider to determine which vaccine would be best for you. In addition to hepatitis B and HPV vaccines, children in grade 6 may need a booster vaccine of varicella or chickenpox. To continue with our school-age children vaccinations, children in grade 9 will also have the opportunity to receive vaccinations for meningococcal quadrivalent conjugate and tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis, or Tdap. The meningococcal quadrivalent conjugate vaccine protects against 4 meningococcal bacterias: A, C, Y, and W. Meningococcal infections are spread from person to person and can cause life-threatening infections such as meningitis and septicemia. According to HealthLink BC, the death rate of meningococcal infections is high at 15 deaths for every 100 infections. In grade 9, students will receive the chance to be vaccinated with 1 dose of meningococcal vaccine. Students will also be eligible to receive the tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis or Tdap vaccine. This vaccine prevents against 3 illnesses. Earlier in this episode, Taylor discussed the disease processes of tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. Now that we have discussed vaccinations for babies, infants, and school-aged children, let's take a look at recommended vaccinations for adults. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention recommends that adults should receive a Tdap booster vaccine every 10 years. The Tdap vaccine is also offered to all pregnant women between gestational ages of 27 to 32 weeks. The pneumococcal polysaccharide vaccine is also another vaccine for adults. This vaccine protects against 23 types of pneumococcal bacteria and is recommended for individuals who are at an increased risk of infection. People who may be at risk for pneumococcal infections include older adults 65 and older, residents living in assisted living, people without a spleen, weakened immune systems, and many more. HealthLink BC has more information for those at greater risk for pneumococcal infections. Now, maybe one of the more commonly known adult vaccines is the shingles vaccine. Shingles is caused by the same virus as chickenpox, called varicella zoster virus. However, shingles presents as a painful, blistering skin rash that usually appears on one side of the face or body. There are currently 2 shingles vaccines available in Canada, Shingrix, which has a 90% success rate, and Zostavax, with a 50% success rate. Both of these vaccines are not recommended until you are 50 years old or older. If you still contract shingles after vaccination, the vaccines help to decrease the side effects of shingles, such as pain. Another commonly known vaccination is the influenza vaccine, commonly referred to as the flu vaccine. Influenza is an infection of the respiratory system caused by the influenza virus. Influenza is spread from person to person and is commonly seen in the fall and winter months. The influenza vaccine is an annual vaccine available for anyone 6 months of age and older. In British Columbia, healthcare workers are required to be annually immunized against influenza or need to wear a mask during direct patient care. This is called the Influenza Prevention Program. The newest addition to the recommended list of vaccinations for adults is the COVID-19 vaccine. The COVID-19 vaccine is an mRNA vaccine that protects against infection from the severe acute respiratory syndrome coronavirus. mRNA vaccines work through the injection of lab-created mRNA, short for messenger RNA, that tells our bodies to create a protein, which triggers an immune response, which in turn creates antibodies to protect us and prepare our bodies to fight off incoming infections in the future. The COVID-19 vaccine is recommended for everyone after 6 months of age, with additional boosters available. Talk to your healthcare provider if you are wondering if any of these vaccines are right for you. Throughout this episode, you might have heard us use terms such as immunity and boosters. I'm going to talk a little bit about what those terms mean. There are times where some vaccines are needed more than once. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, there are a couple reasons for multiple immunizations of the same vaccine. Some vaccines may not have the highest amount of protection in one vaccine. These vaccines are usually non-live vaccines, vaccines that obtain inactivated or killed germs that cause the disease. Due to the lower protection rates, you may need 2 or 3 rounds of vaccination to increase your immunity. For example, vaccines for meningitis may need 2 or 3 rounds of vaccination to be protected. Other times, your body may not develop enough antibodies to respond to potential infection. This is commonly seen in live vaccines. These vaccines contain a very small living portion of the disease. This small amount is not enough to harm you, but does cause your body to create antibodies to fight off any potential disease in the future. Receiving a second dose of a live vaccine, for example, the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, ensures your body has enough of those antibodies to fight off infection. Another reason you may need to receive another round of vaccination is because with time, our immunity to some diseases begins to wear off. To increase our protection and immunity, it is recommended to receive something called a booster dose of the vaccine. This dose acts to boost your immunity to provide you with increased protection.
Thank you, Cameron. If you are just tuning in to A Sound Constitution here on CHLY 101.7 FM, we are talking all things vaccines. So far, we've discussed vaccinations and the diseases they protect against from 2 months of age to older adults. Next, Dana will be here to discuss the anti-vaccination movement and some history behind this.
Hello, and thanks for listening to A Sound Constitution here on CHLY 101.7 FM. My name's Dana, and I'm going to briefly discuss one of the major contributors to vaccine disinformation, Andrew Wakefield. When we hear the term anti-vaccine, it usually leads to the discussion about vaccination and autism. Despite dozens of studies over decades showing absolutely no link, it's a common myth that people still believe. Case in point, In 2016, a study for the Public Health Agency of Canada regarding vaccine acceptancy, hesitancy, and refusal found that 20% of Canadians still believed some form of disinformation about autism and vaccinations. So, how did this myth start? Well, with one person and a falsified, fraudulent study that has caused irreparable harm since. In 1998, doctor and medical researcher Andrew Wakefield publishes a research study in The Lancet, which is a highly regarded British medical journal. This study focused on children with intestinal inflammation and developmental problems. He proposed that there was a causal link between the MMR vaccine, which is measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, and children developing regressive autism in relation to bowel inflammation. He ended up coining this new term, autistic enterocolitis. Following this publication and Wakefield's public campaign, the media snatched the story and it was published all over the world. Sensational headlines followed claiming vaccines were the reason we were seeing increased rates of autism. Celebrities and politicians jumped on the narrative to push their own agendas. And parents who were desperately seeking answers thought they had found it. So with that, immunization rates dropped off a cliff and we started to see the return of diseases that we thought we once wiped out in Canada, like the measles. After this study was published, scientists and physicians started looking at it and they saw some glaring flaws and questioned the contents and the authors. Many actually tried to repeat the study and look further into this new claim, but the results always came back the same. There was no link. One study looked at 1.8 million individuals that had received the MMR vaccine between 1982 and 1996 and found 0 case links. The Wakefield study in itself was problematic on its surface. The study only included 12 children. There are more than 12 children in my immediate family. To make such a claim as Wakefield did, based on the observations of 12 children, is not accurate and is poor research. Researchers also questioned the ethics of the study when it was found out that he subjected vulnerable children to difficult and painful diagnostic tests such as lumbar punctures. That procedure is where they put a needle into your spinal column. But the depth of his fraud wasn't even fully known until 2006 when an investigative reporter named Brian Deere published his expose with all the evidence that Wakefield lied about everything. Wakefield never disclosed that funding for the study included a lawyer who was working on a lawsuit to sue vaccine makers. Wakefield was paid to assist in that lawsuit as well. So he had a lot to gain financially for having a study published that showed exactly what this lawyer needed. On top of that, Wakefield was working on his own patented version of a measles vaccine that he could then sell for a profit and compete against the current MMR vaccine. He also was working on a series of diagnostic tools for his mythical autistic enterocolitis syndrome he made up. Everything was for his financial gain. Details of the study also emerged between Deere's published article and the investigation from the General Medical Council. Wakefield had lied in his study when he said the children were referred to him independently. Many of those children were actually recruited specifically by the lawyer that Wakefield was working with. He also falsified results or admitted information that didn't suit his narrative. 10 of the 12 co-authors of Wakefield's study actually retracted their support for the paper, stating, quoted, "We wish to make it clear that in this paper no causal link was established between the MMR vaccine and autism as the data was insufficient." Over the course of the investigation, The Lancet finally did retract the study, and in 2010, Wakefield rightfully lost his license as a physician. Since then, numerous peer-reviewed, rigorous, high-quality studies have been done showing the same thing. Vaccines do not cause autism. Millions of research dollars that could have been used to fund other important studies were wasted because he lied. And we are still looking at this because the myth persists. In fact, a study was just published in 2019 that looked at 657,000 Danish children born between 1999 and 2010, and it showed no link. Those children were followed for a decade after they received the MMR vaccine. Despite all this evidence, Wakefield has found a home in the hardcore fringes of the anti-vaccine movement, and he continues to profit off people's fear and misunderstanding. The rise of social media and the echo chambers it creates only furthers his influence and continues to cause damage as we see measles outbreaks happen in places once thought eradicated. The hard part is, people like Wakefield take advantage of the significant pressure parents feel to live up to these idealistic Western standards of perfect parenthood or risk being dismissed as terrible parents. Parents who just want to protect their children from harm are being told lies and putting their children at risk of contracting preventable diseases. While this episode is focusing on details about vaccinations and the diseases they prevent, our show notes on our social media pages will contain a series of studies, articles, and videos regarding the anti-vaccination movement, Andrew Wakefield, the role of social media in perpetuating vaccination myths, and how humans develop cognitive biases to inform worldviews. So that's my part for this week, and I'm going to hand it back to Taylor.
Thank you for joining us, Dana, and addressing this important topic. We are going to take a quick break, and then Haben will be here discussing some common myths surrounding vaccines.
Did you know that according to the World Health Organization, the smallpox vaccine was the first vaccination? This vaccine was created in 1796 by Edward Jenner. After the creation of the vaccine, an 80% vaccine coverage in each country was achieved.
Do you know who Jonas Salk is? He's a U.S. physician that created the first successful polio vaccine. When his vaccine became available to the public in 1955, annual cases of polio dropped from 58,000 to 5,600 by 1957 and 161 cases by 1961. Over the following decades of mass public health promotion campaigns and advances in polio vaccination options, the world has seen a decrease of 99% of polio cases. Jonas Salk believed in equitable health access and never profited from his vaccination because he believed eradication comes from low barrier access.
Hello, and thank you for listening to A Sound Constitution here on CHLY 101.7 FM. I'm Haben, and I'm going to address some of the most common misconceptions about vaccinations. Here's myth number 1. Better hygiene and sanitation are actually responsible for decreased infections, not vaccines. Ideas like this are very common, and it intends to suggest that vaccines are not needed, but that's not correct. Better sanitation and conditions have undoubtedly had an indirect impact on disease according to World Health Organization. The development of antibiotics as well as nutrition have increased survival rates among the sick. Having less crowded living conditions have also reduced the disease transmission, and lower birth rates have decreased the number of susceptible household contacts. However, the World Health Organization notes that looking at the actual incidence of disease over the years can leave a little doubt of the significant direct impact vaccines have had, even in the modern times. World Health Organization uses the example of Haemophilus influenza type B, otherwise known as HIB, in children. From an estimated 20,000 cases a year in 1990, there was a drop to 1,419 cases in 1993, following the introduction of the vaccine. While vaccines don't deserve all the credit for reducing or eliminating rates of infectious disease, but when these factors are isolated and rates of infection disease are scrutinized, the role of vaccines cannot be denied. Myth number 2. Natural immunity is better than vaccine-acquired immunity. Well, in some cases, natural immunity, meaning actually catching the disease and getting sick, results in a stronger immunity to the disease than a vaccination. However, the dangers of this approach far outweigh the relative benefits to vaccines. So let's say you wanted to gain immunity to measles. By getting the disease, death is estimated to occur in 2 to 3 people of every 1,000 cases of measles in developed countries, according to the Canadian government website. In contrast, if you were to get a vaccination, only 1 in 3,000 to 4,000 children younger than 7 years old experience febrile seizures, an adverse side effect that causes seizure or jerking caused by fever, but it doesn't have any long-term effects, according to Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Simply put, risks of natural immunity just outweigh the benefits of vaccine-acquired immunity. Myth number 3. There will be fewer side effects if I delay my child's vaccinations. Now, this is not true at all. According to Immunize BC, side effects from vaccination are not more common in young babies than older children. The recommended schedule is designed to protect infants and young children early in life when they are the most vulnerable and before they are potentially exposed to vaccine-preventable diseases. Immunize BC emphasizes that infant and young children are at greater risk from vaccine-preventable diseases because their immune systems are less mature and less able to fight off infection. If an infant or young child were to get a vaccine-preventable disease, it could be very serious and life-threatening. Vaccinating children on time, starting at 2 months of age, gives them the best protection as early as possible. Myth number 4. Getting multiple vaccines at the same time can overwhelm the baby's immune system. This is a common concern among parents of newborns and infants. They often question if their kids are getting too many vaccines or if the vaccines are overwhelming their immune systems. Well, infant immune systems are stronger than you might think. According to Immunize BC, infants have the capacity to produce 1 billion antibodies, so theoretically, a baby would have the ability to respond to around 10,000 vaccines at one time, which means that even combination vaccines that protect against multiple diseases are easy for the child's immune system to handle, thus meaning vaccines do not overwhelm or weaken a child's immune system. Instead, they make it stronger by providing protection against diseases.
I would like to thank my co-hosts Cameron, Dana, and Haben for joining me this episode and for providing some great information. I am now going to be talking about the prevalence within Canada of the diseases that have been mentioned in this episode. The information and statistics I will be providing come from Canada's last published Vaccine Preventable Disease Surveillance Report that presents data collected between 2015 to 2019. I will be referring to this as Canada's VPD Surveillance Report throughout this segment. Additionally, I'm going to provide the percentage of Canadian children that have received each recommended vaccination. These numbers come from Canada's Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey from 2019. According to the Canada's National Immunization Strategy, an overall vaccination coverage goal of 95% is needed to reach herd immunity, and that has been established for all routine childhood vaccinations by 2 and 7 years of age. The hope is that this goal is achieved by 2025, so these numbers will sort of give an idea where we stand in regards to this goal. Canada's VPD surveillance report groups diseases into 3 categories. The first is diseases under elimination, meaning that there are domestic and international programs set to reduce disease incidences to 0. The second group is diseases with low-level incidence, meaning that these diseases generally have an annual incident rate of less than 1 case per 100,000 people. The third group is diseases with a moderate level of incidence. These are the vaccine-preventable diseases that consistently have an annual incident rate equal or greater than 1 case per 100,000 people. We will start off by looking at the diseases under elimination in Canada. These are measles, rubella, and polio. The measles vaccine became available in Canada in 1963 and was made part of routine vaccination programs in 1970. Since the introduction of the vaccine, cases of this disease have declined over 99%. Surveillance report data from 1950 to 1954, before the vaccine was available, show the average annual incidences rate for measles was 373.3 cases per 100,000 population. Between 2015 and 2019, the average incidence rate was 0.2 per 100,000 population annually. This amounts to 394 cases that were reported through Canada's measles and rubella surveillance system during this time period. According to the surveillance system, there was 23 outbreaks of measles between 2015 and 2019, the largest one being due to travel and importation of disease into Canada, which resulted in 159 cases. Because measles is still common in other parts of the world, Canada is still at risk of outbreaks due to travel and secondary transmission. According to Immunize BC, this has occurred on several occasions within the last decade, such as in 2019 when an outbreak occurred in Vancouver and caused a spread in local schools. In 2014, the largest measles outbreak within BC in 30 years occurred in the Fraser Valley and resulted in over 400 cases. Both these incidences occurred in communities with low vaccination rates. According to the 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey, 90% of Canadian children received the first measles vaccine by 2 years of age, and by age 7, 83% of children had received both recommended vaccines. Although these are high percentages, they still do not yet meet Canada's coverage goal of 95%. The rubella vaccine was introduced in Canada in 1969 and was implemented into routine vaccine programs in 1983. The pre-vaccine era between 1950 and 1954 saw an average of 107.2 cases per 100,000 population, which has been greatly reduced to 0.001 cases per 100,000 population between 2015 and 2019. Only 2 cases of rubella were reported during this time frame, and neither of these cases were spread to anyone else. According to Canada's Measles and Rubella Weekly Monitoring Reports, as of October 2022, there are no active cases of rubella in Canada. The 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey saw 89% of Canadian children vaccinated against rubella by 2 years of age and 96% by 7 years of age. Polio has been eliminated in Canada. The polio vaccine was introduced in Canada in 1955, and in 1994, Canada was certified polio-free. However, as with most diseases, surveillance of polio is ongoing due to risk of importation of the virus. Polio is a disease I have heard a lot of from my parents and grandparents, so it is quite amazing that this virus no longer exists in Canada. The surveillance report shows 12,723 cases of polio in Canada between 1950 and 1954, before the introduction of the vaccine. So to be at 0 cases now is great. In 2019, 92% of Canadian children under the age of 2 were vaccinated against polio. Today, we are talking all things vaccines here on A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM. Alright, so now we are going to look at diseases with low-level incidences in Canada. These are diphtheria, tetanus, Haemophilus influenza type B, meningococcal C, and mumps. So to start off, we have diphtheria. The diphtheria vaccine was made available in Canada in 1926, and it has been offered within routine vaccination since the mid-1950s. Prior to this, between 1950 and 1954, Canada saw 1,204 cases of diphtheria, according to the VPD surveillance report during this time. This is actually a large decrease when looking at the report for the year 1925 before the vaccine was introduced, where there were a reported 7,244 diphtheria cases in that 1 year alone. Between 2015 and 2019, there were 24 reported cases of diphtheria in Canada. However, vaccination rates among children remain low at 78% receiving the recommended doses by 2 years of age and 78% by 7 years of age, according to the 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey. Moving on, we have tetanus, which according to HealthLink BC has always been quite rare in Canada. However, infection with tetanus is generally severe. Across Canada, the tetanus vaccine has been included in routine vaccinations since the 1940s. However, these programs have been focused on individual protection rather than herd immunity, as tetanus is not spread from person to person. During the pre-vaccine era between 1935 and 1939, Canada's VPD surveillance report shows an average incidence of 0.2 cases per 100,000 population annually. This has declined by 95% to an average of 0.01 cases per 100,000 population annually between 2015 and 2019. During this time, there were 18 cases of tetanus reported in Canada. Most of these cases were seen in adults 20 years and older. Based on the 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey, 78% of Canadian children received the tetanus vaccine by age 2. Next, we have Haemophilus influenza type B, or Hib. The Hib vaccine has been included in provincial and territorial routine childhood vaccination schedules since 1988. In the 2 years prior to this, 1986 and 1987, there were 1,364 cases of Hib reported in Canada. Between 2015 and 2019, Canada's VPD surveillance report shows 80 cases during this time. The highest incident rates were reported in children under 5. The 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey shows that 74% of children received the Hib vaccine by 2 years of age and 80% by 7 years of age. This will have to be improved if Canada is to meet its 2025 goal of a 95% vaccination coverage rate. Now looking at meningococcal disease. The overall incidences for this disease, overall meaning caused by all types of meningococcal bacteria, has declined by 60% since 2002 when vaccines targeting specific types of this disease were introduced to Canada. You may remember earlier in this episode I had mentioned the different types of meningococcal disease. For a refresher, these types are A, B, C, and W135. However, the vaccine for type C is the only one included in the routine childhood vaccination schedule. Prior to this, meningococcal type C bacteria used to cause the majority of meningococcal infections when compared to the other types. However, this has decreased by 94% since the vaccine was introduced. According to Canada's VPD surveillance report, meningococcal type C now only accounts for 4% of all meningococcal cases seen in Canada. In 2019, 91% of children in Canada had received the recommended doses of this vaccine by 2 years of age. Lastly in this category is mumps. Between 1969 and 1983, a routine one-dose mumps vaccine was implemented across Canada, with the second dose being added to the schedule between 1996 and 2001. Between 1950 and 1954, Canada's VPD surveillance report reported a whopping 207,697 cases of mumps. Fortunately, this number has decreased significantly to a reported 3,671 cases between 2015 and 2019. These cases were due to outbreaks that occurred in multiple provinces, and the age group affected most were those between 20 and 39 years old. Mumps outbreaks continue to occur every 2 to 5 years. The 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey found that 89% of children in Canada received the recommended dose of the mumps vaccine by 2 years of age and 83% by 7 years of age. Okay, I know this is a lot of information to take in, so we are going to take a quick break and then I will be back to talk about those diseases with moderate level incidence rates in Canada.
Did you know that if you are traveling outside of Canada, you may be at risk for a number of diseases that are rarely found in Canada, but might be common in other parts of the world? Immunize BC has a list of travel vaccines that are recommended for you if you are traveling outside of Canada.
Did you know that if you can't remember if your child got a vaccine and has no record, that it's safe to repeat the vaccine? Immunize BC states that getting an extra dose of vaccine when an immunization history is unknown is not harmful. It is better to ensure protection by getting the vaccine than risk leaving your child unprotected.
It is important to stay in clinic for 15 minutes after getting any vaccine because there is an extremely rare possibility of anaphylaxis. This is a life-threatening allergic reaction that may include hives, difficulty breathing, or swelling of the throat. According to HealthLink BC, the possibility of this occurring is less than 1 in 1 million. Alright, we are back and we are going to be looking at the vaccine preventable diseases with moderate level incidences in Canada. These are pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, varicella, otherwise known as chickenpox, and pneumococcal disease. I will start off with pertussis. The pertussis vaccine was first introduced to Canada in 1943. Between 1938 and 1942, before the vaccine was made available in Canada, the VPD surveillance report shows that there were 88,884 cases of pertussis during these years. The latest report between 2015 and 2019 shows 14,646 cases, with rates highest in children under 15 years old. Unfortunately, during this time period, 3 infants under the age of 6 months died due to pertussis. According to the VPD surveillance report, an increase in the rate of pertussis cases occurs every 2 to 5 years and can last several years. Based on the 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey, 78% of children received the recommended doses of the pertussis vaccine by age 2. Moving on, we have pneumococcal disease. The first childhood pneumococcal vaccine was implemented across Canada between 2002 and 2006. This vaccine protected against 7 types of bacteria responsible for this disease. In 2011, the current PCV13 vaccine, which protects against 13 types of bacteria, was introduced into Canada's routine vaccination schedule. Pneumococcal disease only became notifiable in the year 2000. This means that prior to this, it wasn't required that cases be reported to public health authorities. Because of this, there is not a lot of data to support the incident rate of pneumococcal disease prior to the introduction of the vaccine. However, the data from Canada's VPD surveillance report shows that cases have declined from 46% in 2010 to 21% in 2018. According to the 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey, 85% of Canadian children received the recommended dose of this vaccine by 2 years of age. The last vaccine preventable disease I will be discussing is varicella, also known as the chickenpox. So the chickenpox vaccine was first approved in Canada in 1998 and was then added into routine vaccination programs across Canada between 2000 and 2007. In the pre-vaccine era, between 1993 and 1997, Canada's VPD surveillance reports show 180,225 cases of chickenpox across Canada. Between 2015 and 2019, this number was greatly reduced to 2,366 cases. Hospitalizations due to serious varicella infections among children in Canada have also declined from an average annual rate of 398 prior to the introduction of the vaccine to an annual average of 47 between 2015 to 2019. Based on the 2019 Childhood National Immunization Coverage Survey, 83% of Canadian children under the age of 2 were vaccinated against chickenpox. Well, there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that you were able to learn more about the routine vaccinations offered here in BC, the diseases they help protect against, some facts versus myth, and much more. We encourage you to reach out to your healthcare provider if you'd like more information. As always, check out our Facebook and Instagram page for resources for today's show. If there are any topics that you'd like us to discuss, let us know by email at asoundconstitution@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to us on A Sound Constitution on CHLY 101.7 FM.